So let's start about him. So he is my senior. He is coming from my alma mater, IIT Bombay. And he have done MS and PhD from chemical engineering and also MBA from MIT. So with this all academic excellence, he has contributed in Illumina as a chief corporate officer, chief financial officer. So kind of he has taken care of all the investor relation, corporate strategy, and development. Similar way in Thermo Fisher, he has contributed as a leader in clinical next generation sequencing to bring in the market. So without delay, I would like Joydeep to come here and introduce the panel.
Thank you, Ranjit. I'll just ask my fellow panelists to also join me on stage.
Thank you.
Ja,
No,
near the side here. Ja, we sit here because he has to sit there, right?
All right, so the purpose of the panel, of course, as Ranjit just mentioned, is to wake you all up and hopefully also give you a little perspective, maybe somewhat different from the other panels you've heard this morning on, this interface between life sciences, healthcare, and AI, and the changing faces on it. And of course, talking to the panelists a little bit earlier as well, there's a lot that I'm interested in learning from the panelists as well about, how the changes in the industry that are coming up interface with India and how India could contribute to this in a better manner, right? So just the premise of the panel really is coming up with one of the biggest things in life science these days is the ability to interrogate samples, biological data, both at depth and at scale, right? And that's a huge change that is coming in where instead of just looking at biological samples and interrogating it with just a narrow range, you're able to do it with thousands or hundreds of thousands of samples and hundreds of thousands of data points. And that's not just in genomics now, so the DNA or RNA of a cell, you're increasingly getting into proteins and metabolomics and other technologies as well. So that's one level of piece. That then gets matched up with the ability to get clinical information from the patient and how the patient is doing in response to certain drugs or as diseases progress or with whatever is happening in the environment. So that's, kind of point number two. And then you layer on the ability to handle data at scale, both from, the things that are taking place in the tech world, but everything that you're hearing about from the AI, generative AI, and ML side of things, right? So that's kind of the interesting piece. And we are starting to see that have an effect on every part of healthcare, all the way from basic research to drug discovery, to clinical development, and then the delivery and monitoring of patients post-drug approval. Along with that, of course, I keep talking about data, but as you'll hear from the panelists as well, that there is a huge need to then protect data, not only within the company, but also patient data. And you've got to strike a balance here, right? Because you can be overly protective and then you lose the power of the very information and the data at scale that you can have. But of course, that comes along with the ability to protect patient privacy and the likes of that. So that's what we hope to address at the panel today. Let me first start off by letting the panelists briefly introduce themselves and their backgrounds a little bit, and maybe starting with you, Dominic.
Hi, yes, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. So my name's Dominic Kingsmith. I'm a theoretical physicist by training, so I'm originally in the physical sciences area, studied in Cambridge, did an undergraduate and PhDs there. Then I was a research fellow at one of the Cambridge colleges for about 3 years, then came to Rutgers University in 1991, and then came here to San Diego in 93, which is where I've been ever since, because the weather here is pretty darn good, I have to say. And then, for the last 20 years, I've been in the life sciences space, and for the last 4 years, I've been leading a company called Ensign Therapeutics, which is actually based here in San Diego, but it's been funded and financed by an Indian CDMO, and I'll tell you a bit more maybe about kind of their vision for, bringing more innovative therapies to market and how that model has worked. But perhaps I'll stop there and let the others introduce themselves.
Thanks, Dom.
Patrick? Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Patrick Johnson. I'm the president of a company called SidNexus. We're headquartered up in Del Mar. I started off my career as an academic, as a researcher, working in labs, writing grants for many years, and then transitioned from there to starting a small company. So I was a co-founder of a company, ran that for a number of years, and then interestingly left that small company environment and went to work for Big Pharma. And I ran a corporate development group at a company called Allergan in the eye care space, and actually a specialty pharma across a number of different spaces. But ran a corporate development group there where my task was to look to in-license a lot of technologies from the ecosystem, wherever that may be. And then I left Allergan a number of years ago to follow an asset that I'm now developing. We just finished our pivotal phase 3 study, so really exciting time for us. But I've been running this company for about 7 years now. And so really exciting times. Been through the ecosystem of the life sciences throughout my whole career, and have seen a lot of different levels.
Great. So, hello, everyone. My name is Uma Chandrasekhar, and my background is in electrical engineering. I'm a double E, and basically my whole career has been in innovation and in R&D, really driving, looking across both different industries, from telecom to med device to looking at across other industries. And bottom line here is that I've always been interested in how do we get to areas where we can drive new innovations and still have what I call the guards in place that doesn't disrupt innovation. For me, today, what I do is I head up a global product security organization within Alcon, which is an ophthalmology company. Most of you who have contact lens or have had any kind of cataract surgery or know anyone with cataract surgery has probably had touched some parts of Alcon in some form. So I'm really honored to be here today with this esteemed panel and looking forward to sharing some of our nuggets.
Awesome.
Rami.
Rami Mejio, really glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Likewise, I'm an electrical engineer. I grew up in Lebanon and immigrated to Canada, studied electrical engineering, and the first 15 years of my life, I built software and hardware for cell phones. So in fact, if you have likely an iPhone, some of my code may be in the Wi-Fi chip of your phone. Right? At some point, I got recruited to co-found a company in genomics, to analyze genomics data. And that company's idea was to do it through technology used in telecom, chips like FPGAs, and today you see GPUs and so on, to accelerate this analysis, given that the scale of genomics has grown. We successfully built a product called Dragon and sold it to Illumina, where I met Joydeep. And since then, I had the software and informatics of that company, where now we've expanded to a much bigger portfolio. And I'm excited to work on a lot of these innovations with customers to mine genomics data for healthcare.
Perfect, thank you. So let me actually start with you, Rami, with that introduction, right? You've been at the heart of what I would call the genomics revolution, and now it's becoming more and more that multiomics revolution, right? So talk to us a little bit of what you're seeing going on there and how that's changing sort of the face of basic drug discovery, basic research, and where you see that going.
Yes, it's fascinating. I think one of the biggest, multiple pillars that are moving at the same time, and AI plays a key role in them. One of the very interesting parts is how pharma and the ecosystem is looking to create more therapeutics faster and cheaper. And they latched on really a concept that is pretty amazing. To mine genomics data, people who are sequenced, along with looking at their electronic health records. By doing this association at scale, and really the statistics are very important. The bigger the set of sample, the better the information you can get. You're able to find out which mutations somebody has or a set of mutations are able to cause disease or to protect from disease, right? And that's what's called drug target discovery. And from there on, there is a whole set of steps to basically figure out what this mutation causes, and you have to predict that, and AI plays a role, and how you can disrupt what this change does, and how to basically predict through AI what is, for example, a drug target that doesn't have adverse side effect, how to design it through, if you probably heard some of these big efforts by Google and others to do protein design or drug target design, and even perhaps simulate the effect of the drug on the body. So huge field, really a lot of money going into it. Within the same set of data, there is an aspect also of improving population health. So when you have access to this very large data set of electronic health records and genomics data, you're able to predict through something called polygenic risk scores the chances of somebody developing heart disease and at what age and when it's beneficial for them to start, say, statins to prevent cardio disease and reduce the burden on the health system. So amazing also area of innovation. Maybe a couple of others quickly. People are, and of course, all this data gets much more rich when you add to it the measurement of proteins, the measurement of the epigenome. Those are additional information to mine along with the healthcare data. The other part is basically a big effort by pharma to introduce variation in the genome or in cells through CRISPR processes, and do it at scale and learn the effect of every mutation on the system. And by doing that, they are able to basically find therapies and gene editing therapies that are much more effective. So really very interesting space we work in today.
Thanks, Rami. That's really helpful, and that scale at which that information is growing each and every day from both contributions from research, but as you said, right, population level data from every clinical trial that goes into it is really important. So maybe Uma, I would love to get your perspective a little bit on how are companies managing this data, and what are some of the push-pull kind of things that you have to deal with between protection and availability, and kind of how are you leading that? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, no, so Joydeep, I would like to first of all share kind of a personal story on my side. A few years ago, my father, who was a picture of health, was really all of a sudden suddenly was taken to the hospital. And I venture to say that we didn't know what was wrong with him, right? And this was not in the US, it was in Canada. And as he was taken to the hospital, we kind of, my siblings and myself, my husband and all, we didn't understand what was going on. And I was trying to get data. What is really going on here? And, it was very difficult because of consent. And difficult because I'm not the patient. And he was not conscious to be able to give me that data. So unfortunately, a long story short, 3 days later, he passed away. And I, of course, being very devastated by this whole situation, wanted to find out, get to the root cause, because ultimately, from a genetics perspective, you want to know, is this something that I have to worry about for myself, my kids, and so on? Unfortunately, writing to the government, writing to the Canadian government, writing to everyone, who I could to say, hey, can I get access to the data? Wait 90 days, I'm sure today with AI and everything, we can get everything done much faster, but wait 90 days. And the answer was no, you cannot because you are not allowed. So data, talking about data, I'd like to flip the coin and say, we're all worried about data being protected, but what about getting it into the right people's hands? ultimately, that is what I think all of us have a story about that, where we know someone in our family was really looking for that information and we couldn't give it to them. So I'd like to just share three kind of what I'm going to say, what I use for my personal view, 3 codes of ethics. It's called Security Code of Ethics. If you don't mind me, I'll just read it. So data ownership should be used to improve humanity. Think about that. Everything we do has to be used to improve humanity. The second rule, data usage should have a legitimate intent, guided by reasonable humans. Now I know we're talking AI coming in. What does that mean? Okay. As code 1 is not violated, which was, it should be used. Third rule, data must be protected as long as it does not conflict with code 1 and code 2. So if we keep these codes in mind and we build the protections, all of the things that you know today, whether it's de-identified, anonymization, all of the other things, they're just the technologies, the capabilities that support it. But I think ultimately it's a human who's in the picture that has to be part of that. So to me, that is where even though my role is as security, you always think, oh, you're never gonna, you don't want to violate the rules and things. But ultimately for me, it is getting it into the right people's hand for research to improve patient outcomes, to improve everything we do. So it really goes back to doing the right, every data is not the same, making sure you do the risk analysis, do the threat modeling, all of the things that those of us in security know, but you have to take a step back and say, what is this data about? Why is it being used? And what's the worst thing that could happen? That's what I would like to say.
Thanks, Uma. Appreciate that. Dominic, maybe we'll flip to you. I mean, obviously, crazy. You come from a physics background, you're heading up a pharmaceutical company, but I've found your journey really interesting in terms of how you've looked at innovation or bringing innovation in conjunction with an Indian company that's trying to get from the basic stuff into more moving up the value chain. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're seeing as some of the key trends happening in the industry today in terms of healthcare and what you're seeing in terms of both the US, but also what's happening with India.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting prompt. So, so the company that I lead is Enzen Therapeutics, and basically, we're in the business of making an innovative compound. We actually have a compound that we licensed from GSK, and we've been funded by an Indian CDMO to develop this compound. And I think that's sort of emblematic of kind of the aspirations of the Indian pharmaceutical industry. So if you look at the industry today, I mean, it's about a $30 billion innovation space that we have in pharmaceuticals, and most of that is in the CDMO space with companies that are often providing services to foreign countries, doing chemistry to make compounds, making formulations. There's a thriving generics business, obviously, in India with companies making small molecule drugs and increasing innovation in the area of biosimilars as well. But if you look at kind of pure biotech with the kinds of technologies that have been discussed on this panel and genomic therapies, cell therapies, the next wave of things, still it's very, very nascent in India, and it's just kind of you're seeing the green shoots of that happening, but it's probably only 1% of that $30 billion line that's being put into the really innovative therapies. And so I think that N-Cube, that is a company that I've been working with who are based in Mumbai, they're basically in the topical semi-solid formulation space, and they've done something very interesting, and they said, look, I mean, we'd love to get into this innovation space, but we don't really know quite how to do it. We have great formulation scientists, we have a lot of expertise in making generics, but we don't know how to do innovative products. And so, their approach to it has been to basically recruit somebody, myself in this case, as the CEO of a company. And then we had a project, we basically looked around the world and we said, what is the most innovative thing that we could do with a semi-solid formulation? And we evaluated hundreds of assets and then came up with this molecule that came from GSK. And then another really interesting thing that they thought about was, well, why don't we do something in the rare disease space as well? And I think that's a very, very good opportunity for for Indian companies as we think about how to grow this space of, really innovative biotechnology companies. And the reason is that there are several factors that make rare diseases really, really interesting opportunity for the Indian space. And that is, first of all, a huge population. And so one of the key challenges in trying to develop rare disease drugs is often trying to recruit patients. And so having 1 billion people in one country that is available to do a clinical study is a huge strategic advantage for an Indian company working in this space. The second thing is that we also see a lot of consanguineous marriages that take place in India as well. And so this is going to basically drive the prevalence of rare genetic diseases because intermarriage tends to make those things more common. And so again, that helps to increase the overall population that we have. And so these types of factors and are very, very interesting. And then in addition, what we also have is the ability to get drugs potentially approved based on India data alone. And so in India, most drugs, to get them approved in the US, you have to be able to show that they work in a US population. And it comes down to the kinds of factors we talked about before, like, most diseases are very multifactorial, and so it's an interaction of the environment and the genome that's causing the challenge for the patient. But in the case of a rare disease, it's often a very simple genetic problem. It's like a Mendelian type thing. You've got a double mutation of this one particular gene, and you're going to get the disease. That's exactly the kind of disease that we're working on in NZen. And so in that case, all of the factors that the FDA would typically worry about concerning different background genetics in say, an Indian population versus a US population, those are largely obviated by the fact that it's a very simple genetic thing and it's not a multifactorial disease like asthma or a cancer or something like that. And so, therefore, they're actually willing, in the FDA's case, to look at approving drugs in this area. So I think that creates a tremendous opportunity, and I think that this could be a very interesting way for Indian companies to be able to expand, this life sciences space and take advantage of some very special things that are happening in India that would be giving, exceptional access and chances to have really interesting returns on investments in this space.
That's fascinating, and especially that sort of rare disease piece that I had not really appreciated that makes, gives India sort of an advantage there. Hey, Patrick, build on that story a little bit. You've had an extensive career in business development and looking at innovation in all sorts of places outside the company, right? And talk a little bit about how you're seeing that change. Are you seeing new places of innovation coming up or opportunities to capitalize on innovation that might have happened but failed for some reason? And how do you see maybe India playing a bigger context in that as well?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And the idea is, where does innovation come from? And I think historically, in our life sciences environment, there's an ecosystem, and the U.S. has invested incredible amounts of money in basic research. 3+% of our GDP goes to basic research every year. That's a massive number. And it's been happening for 70 plus years, since after World War II. So that's how you build a foundation for innovation, is long-term investment. And then the ecosystem evolves, and you've got those discoveries that happen in the basic research labs. They get turned into patents. And then that's the second layer, where you have to have a patent system that can protect an invention so that you can have time to develop it, because it takes a lot of time to develop these things, especially in the life sciences, which is where a lot of us exist, right? So the foundation of that ecosystem has to be based in investment and time and protecting inventions. And India has traditionally spent less than 1% of their GDP on this type of R&D investment. And so if you look back a little bit, the GDP of India used to be really pretty small. It's gotten a lot bigger recently, and that's fantastic. And they've been trying to maintain these investments, but you have to maintain significant investment in basic research over long periods of time in order to feed the ecosystem. And then you get to the next levels where you get translation of those inventions, and those inventions get invested in because there's confidence in the patent system and protecting those, and it gives you time to let your investment do its work. Let the researchers figure out how to try to commercialize on that. And then the top of that ecosystem, that chain is really the commercialization of products, which happens to a very small percentage of those. So, India has the opportunity with so many universities and such a large population to really build from that basic level of research and fund that basic level research, increase the investment in that research. But in the meantime, when you don't have the ability to wait 20 years to do that, then what do? You have to subsidize things. Look at the way alternative energies work in this world, right? They don't solar just doesn't come out and people start investing in it. There's subsidies that happen for a number of years in order to get those technologies to the point where they're financially viable. And those subsidies also help people invest, help the venture groups, help investors invest in those technologies because there's guarantee from the government. So I think what India can really do to help foster innovation is to find a point in the ecosystem where they can interject. First of all, you got to invest that money. But after, other than investing that core money in basic research, you can facilitate the translation of those technologies by subsidizing companies that have already gotten to a certain point, by helping them with, protecting their products and providing guarantees in innovation. A patent is a guarantee on innovation, right? And if you can protect products and people are willing to put money into it. So, it's really interesting. Dominic's company is kind of the other area that, when I was at Allergan, like I was saying, I saw basically everything. My goal was to bring products into our company, and I saw basic research, I saw translational research, I saw big pharma. They would literally call us up because we were an eye care company, and they'd say, we have 200, here's a list of 200 programs that we're developing. The public only knows about 20 of them. And there's 180 programs here that nobody knows about. Any of those interesting to you in eye care? Do you want to develop those as an eye care drug? Because we're not going to do that. We'll give you a license. So Dominic essentially was saying how he pulled technology out of GSK. And that's what allowed him to start his company and develop. So there's a company here in San Diego called Impact Biomedicines. Some of you might know them. And a couple years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, they sold for $1 billion. I think it was to Sanofi. And they pulled a technology out of a big pharma. They had run a drug study, and it wasn't with the right population. So they had run a study, and it was kind of we call them all-comers, a general population. And this John Hood, an innovator in San Diego, saw that, and he said, what I need some data to get the right patients into this study. I need to run another study, and then I need to slice and dice that data because they analyzed it in a different way. I need to slice and dice that data from a genetic perspective and understand how I can get this drug approved. And he did that, and he did it all on data. He got data, and I don't remember the exact story, but he realized if you just give these patients biotin, you're going to bypass the adverse events, and then they're going to be just fine. It was something simple like that. That's data, right? That's exactly what Rami was talking about. So anyways, innovation can come from a lot of places. I think India could really focus on investing in the basic research. That's an obvious place, but they can also facilitate these different levels of the ecosystem. They can help companies translate. They can help. They can start a group. Gunjan is a great example of someone who facilitates business with India. We do business with India, and Gunjan facilitates that. India could facilitate business with them by bringing groups to help translate business, to help encourage business, subsidize businesses. But when you don't have that full foundation at the bottom, that ecosystem's not quite ready yet, then you have to do something else. You have to subsidize or invest.
It's a really good point, right? And you talked about, the model in the US and certain extent in Europe, and actually definitely in China, which is, it's been amazing what they've done in the last 30 years, right? But a lot of that investment has come from the government, which I don't see in India. And again, many of you are more familiar with that. What I have started seeing, and I think it's interesting that you talk about is private capital starting to flow into some of these things, and where you interject in that continuum of discovery and development is quite important. You don't have to start at that basic research level. You can come in at a different level. So that's a really interesting idea. Maybe I'll pick up on your concept here on first data, right? And all of us have been talking about data, but it's data not just on a particular individual. So I may know all about my genome, but it isn't relevant unless you put it in context, right? That's where the population piece of it comes in, knowing other patients that have a similar profile or have come in. And Uma, when you were talking, that's one of the things that struck me, right? That it's also very hard in the US, especially in the US, with the way we are set up in different health systems, different hospitals that don't share data and often are not on the same system, right? So the power of analytics and AI hits against that wall that you just don't have everything on the same basis anymore, right? So where do you see that going? And Rami, maybe you can also interject a little bit on that, right? So
I was going to comment on that, actually.
yeah, so maybe you guys can talk a little bit about that.
I think exactly, you talked about the data and the access to it and on a personal level. I think maybe just stepping back a little bit, there's innovations like, for example, some of these tests that you do today on blood to detect early cancer, really super valuable, great for humanity, and it needs a lot of data to make these tests accurate. We are standing in, our data policies are blocking the innovation towards actually making those very effective. What we need is all data of all hospitals to be structured and available for research. And today, a lot what is limiting us is not the technology to develop these tests, is actually access to data to build these tests and validate them and figure out what is a predictor for cancer, what tells you that you have early cancer or not. And same with drug discovery, right? So the data policies today inhibit us from actually progressing. Only the people who are able to fund access to the data today through research are able to progress. So, and even those, the richest pharmas, can't do enough of it to basically get us in a much better place.
And I think it's a great point, Ramani. So one thing I feel that is really, it's a lot about ethics. Everything comes down to policies, ethics. Even you see in AI, right? I mean, there's a lot going on about governance and ethics and all about what, should we and should we, but who makes that call? I mean, ultimately, every company, every organization is really trying to build innovations, but there's this boundary of fear. And I believe that one of the areas where data is moving more and more is simulation, right? I mean, synthetic data. I mean, there's a lot of work happening in that space where because data is so expensive and there's a lot of other things taking place in that space where you cannot get access because of the rules, regulations, policies, and so on. But if you can still do the same thing, you know what the data looks like, and you're able to get diversity, and hopefully unbiased, you can, R&D is very powerful in terms of innovation space, and that's another problem you have to solve to get to the real thing you want, unfortunately, but it's doable.
That's a fascinating point, right? Because you said, and I'll take a few of the audience questions. So one thing that you brought up, which is this ability to almost have digital twins, right?
Yes.
This is starting to come up a lot in other industries. I mean, on the engineering side, even in Formula One racing now, there are teams coming up with this. So, there's a question from the audience, I think, which is related to this around, how does AI compute power accelerate drug discovery and development, right, into faster and hopefully more cost-effective drugs, right? So are you seeing some changes here that bode well as AI compute power comes in to drive that faster and more effectively?
I mean, I think maybe the parallel I see is at Illumina where we work, we basically engineer proteins, and traditionally we do them by testing and modification and looking what they do and so on. And certainly the field and it's very expensive, and you can do so much by experimentation. We've moved, and people are moving towards basically designing proteins based on AI, AlphaFold 3 and all these kind of new programs from Google and other. And those apply equally well for drugs. You're able to design the molecules digitally. Yeah, so big shifts in that space.
Anything from your perspective?
Well, I mean, from a CDMO, kind of, being funded by a CDMO company, then I think definitely, in that space, there's a lot of, kind of engineering things where we see the opportunity to use AI to improve manufacturing, and I guess that's a pretty common application these days. I think actually in the rare diseases space, which is obviously something that's close to my heart, I mean, also finding patients, that's an interesting AI problem because, maybe there's social media sites, for example, out there, and people are maybe talking about their disease. Maybe they don't even know that they have the disease, but they're talking about their symptoms and, mining all of that data and applying AI to try and find those patients. That's the goal, right? I mean, we have a disease that we're trying to treat, which has got a prevalence of 1 in 200,000. And so that means there's only 1,500 patients in the US. If we go to India, there's more, but there's even less tracking of the patients. So how do we find those patients? And this could be a really interesting way of being able to do that.
That's fascinating. That's a really good point about, just finding patients, because that's a huge, huge issue. We were talking about that, Patrick, so maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
I couldn't agree more. Right now, the way the model typically works is we've got an idea of the patient we're looking for, and those patients exist out there, and we go to the doctors and we say, doctors, find those patients and enroll them in our study. Why can't we go direct to the patient itself and say, we already know who you are, you're sitting right there and you're sitting right there, but unfortunately I've got to go to that doctor and have that doctor find that patient, enroll that patient, so there's a middle person, and we don't need that. But again, how do you facilitate that? How do you get that information out there? I used an example with the group earlier about this registry that exists in ophthalmology and eye care. It's called the IRIS registry, and I think it's got 700 million patient visits recorded in it, and there's millions of patients in this registry. And that registry is now mineable. And there's a company up north called Verana Health that's mining that registry and trying to be that interface between the companies and the patients directly. And so, in my opinion, I think, getting rid of the middleman, you need healthcare providers, that's critical, but you don't have to use them to find the patients to enroll. It took me 2 years to enroll 850 kids into a clinical trial. 2 years. You know how much money I burned in 2 years? I burned 20% of my 5-year budget in 2 years. Just trying to enroll these kids, find them, and get them in the study. You can make innovation a lot more efficient and cheaper. And whenever that happens, then a lot more people are willing to put money into it.
So you actually answered one of the questions that was there, right? In terms of lowering, making drug discovery and even development cheaper, right? It's not just the discovery part, because finding these patients. I mean, are there any other ways that you're seeing AI change or lower the barriers of entry into developing new molecules or developing novel drugs that are far-reaching? Anything that you've seen that stands out to you?
I want to ask a question to the panel. This is kind of ad lib, but when I was in graduate school, rational protein design was a thing, right? And you would spend 5 years developing one molecule to one little pocket in a receptor. Where are we now with that? I mean, it's a lot quicker now.
Right. So definitely, again, I think the tech industry has led the way. Quite interesting enough, the protein design through these programs, the most famous one is this AlphaFold one. We're able to figure out essentially each mutation, which part of the function of protein, what it does, to a large extent. And of course, there's experimentation and validation at the end. But that has gone a long way, and it's helping in every aspect of where proteins are meant to go.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We have just about a minute left. One of the things that, from an India context, has always come up is the fact that there's that huge demographic dividend, right? You have, 1.45 billion people, but a lot of them are younger, and in the context of what we're discussing today, do you see any ways that India can use that demographic dividend of, spending more of its GDP on healthcare, the availability of more information on more sort of rare diseases that's come to the fold, the ability to conduct clinical trials? I mean, what are some of the innovative ways that you could think that India can use that demographic dividend to sort of leapfrog other countries in life sciences and healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely exciting. I think there's a lot of things that can be done in India. So there's obviously sort of regulatory barriers and those sorts of things and I think, if India could harmonize its whole regulatory process a lot more with the rest of the world, that would be a big advantage. So we have the ICH, mechanism, and I think if India would fully embrace that, that would be something that would really help to spur innovation. But you go to India and it's just amazing. The energy and the enthusiasm, and so it's I think it's just having young people and they have ideas, and young people today are much smarter than I ever was, right? Because they have a cell phone and they have access to the internet, and so I think it will be tremendously successful.
I have one final comment on that topic, which I think it's unique, and that just kind of came to me as we were talking about this. But India does one thing I think better than any other country in the world. It's what's the world's largest democracy, and the way that they get out and get people to vote, the efforts that India makes to get into each individual community, the access that they have to the Indian population is bar none. No other country does that, nor on that scale. So, what can India do to facilitate that, right? And leverage that. You've already got access to these people. You've got a mechanism to get to all your entire population in a very short period of time. And no other country can do that. So, I'll leave it to you guys. Think about that. How can you leverage that to innovate in the healthcare life sciences system? So, yeah.
Really interesting observation, actually. Just driving that to recruitment and other things. Okay, I think we'll run out of time. Apologize to the audience. I know there were a couple of questions that came through Slido. And Ranjit, wherever you are, your Slido model has been validated. So thank you again. Thank you, panelists. Really interesting perspectives. Appreciate Gunjan. I know you put together everything. So thank you again for inviting us. And yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very insightful panel, and we would like to thank the speakers.